Hey, if you're in quarantine, I just wanted to check in with you and make sure that some of the plans this week were clear. I keep adjusting them because what we get done in class always fluctuates, and so I just wanted to clarify and hopefully make it understandable to you. So as you kind of look through, obviously the first thing each day is taking some time to read. Then the second thing is basically a set of tools we're using to start to build our argument capacity. And so, you know how class works. We often start with a question. And what we've been trying to do is when we answer that question, we're trying to practice some specific argument strategies. We've worked on types of claims, ways to address the audience's needs, and then rhetorical appeals. So that's kind of the way that this week has worked. So I was just going to walk through that real quickly with you. In terms of types of claim, what we're trying to think about with that one is what do I want from the audience? And so our goal this week is just to kind of shift from thinking about what do I want to say when I build an argument to what does the audience need to hear? And we just started thinking about this way that what I can do is kind of figure out do I want the audience to think, feel, or do something? And those were three specific types of claim: a claim of fact, value, or policy. And what that does is it clarifies and narrows and adds specificity to my claim. Okay, because now I know exactly what I'm trying to get the audience to do. And now the audience knows that also, and the argument becomes more persuasive because it's clearer. Okay. This also helps set me up. If I want them to think a certain way, that's going to shape what kind of evidence I choose. It's going to shape the examples that I select. And so knowing this is a really crucial step at the beginning of our arguments. I figure out my stance, and I figure out what do I want from the audience. And we just tried to practice this by looking at this pretty interesting clip of a mom who had to call the police on her son when she discovered some troubling things in his journal. So it gives you a chance here just to practice each of those types of claims. Okay, and that was kind of the Monday/Tuesday work, depending on which bell you're in. Then we started to look at the next step, which is all right. I've thought about my audience. I want them to think or feel or do something. Now I've got to anticipate their needs. They might have certain concerns or questions or objections. So we just walked through 4 ways that you can do that, typically towards the beginning of your argument, right? You might concede a point and just acknowledge that something is true that is negative towards your argument. Okay, we might just say up front, hey, I know that you feel a certain way, okay, and I'm not going to change that. And that's okay. You can concede a point. You can also do things that are more neutral, like acknowledge a point. You can just acknowledge, I acknowledge that people feel this way. You might not agree with it, but you're just letting the audience know, I get it, right? I understand that you are resistant or skeptical. You can also set up and define the parameters of your argument at the beginning. Okay, we did one in class this week that was about computers grading essays. And one class, they defined the parameters by saying, we think computers should grade grammar only. And they just said, we're not going to argue about all the other things computers can and can't do, but we think that's the parameter we want to work inside of. One class had a question about graffiti and art, and we had to define the term art before we could progress in that argument. Those are kind of neutral steps that put your audience at ease to know you define the parameters. I'm not going to argue all these things, just this one thing. Or if you're setting up the terms, that way the audience and you can be on the same page. So this is just another step that you can take that can help. The last thing you might do with the audience, if you know they have an objection, you can work to set up a counter argument. You can acknowledge, although you might think this, here's why my argument is perhaps better. Okay. And so all 4 of these are things you might do. You may not do all 4, but at the beginning of an argument, it's wise to figure out which of these is going to help your audience be able to think, feel, or do what you want them to do. Okay. And we practice this by just looking at Sue Klebold's TED Talk. And she's fascinating because her son is one of the Columbine killers. And she talks about that and what her journey's been like and what she's learned from her son. And we've tried to look at this through the lens of how does she prepare to face an audience who probably thinks the worst things about her possible, right? And I think you'll notice how she tries to address their concerns and potential challenges that she sees. And so this was just a chance to reflect on that in your writer's notebook. The last piece in the learning plan asked you to read a little bit about the rhetorical appeals, about logos, pathos, and ethos. And this just fit into our discussion this week this way. We've thought about what we want the audience to think, feel, or do. tried to anticipate its needs. The follow-up question is really like, what evidence can I use to get them to think, feel, or do what I want? Like, what do they need to see in order to agree? Okay, and that's where the logos, pathos, and ethos comes in. Okay, it helps you to think through. If I'm going to make a claim of fact and want them to think like me, there are certain logical appeals I can make. If I want them to feel like me, again, there are certain appeals to emotion that are effective, and that handout really outlines them clearly. And then lastly, if I'm making a claim of policy, how can I build trust? An ethos is about trust. And you can use all three appeals for any type of claim, but that's just a way to start thinking about it. Okay, what evidence is available to me? Again, to get the audience where I want them to go. Okay, so as you're looking at those three pieces that we've added this week, if you've got questions, feel free to shoot me a note, or if the task doesn't seem to line up to that piece, let me know as well. But essentially, what we're trying to focus on this week is thinking about our argument writing by focusing on audience. Okay. All right. Well, hopefully this is helpful, and hopefully we get to see you guys back in class again very soon.